province. Your southern Alberta, from the heart of Lethbridge. It's Bridge City News Weekend Edition with Jeanette Roche.
Hello, thanks for joining us for this weekend review. It's a landmark most of us in Lethbridge are familiar with. I'm talking about the clock tower on the old post office building on 4th Avenue here in our city. But it's now a beacon of hope for those seeking employment as the home of the Lethbridge Teamworks Career Center. The new job search hub will help unemployed Albertans find work by offering up programs to help them reach that next step in their job searches. As Micah Quinn explains, this is also the 30th anniversary for the center.
Having our grand opening here today at this historic building of the post office is such an exciting time for us.
When you make your way into the old post office building, you will see the new Teamworks Career Center on the 3rd floor. The center is funded by the Alberta Ministry of Labour and Immigration and the Government of Canada. Services are provided to people looking to find work alongside potential employers. This is all free of charge. A few of the programs offered are meant to focus on transitioning the skills of the workforce to meet the demand of local employers here in our city.
So some of those programs, there's a project hire program that allows you to work and customize your own individual plan with a career coach, help do that career planning, help get some specific training to your career goal, and to work with employers in that. We also have some occupational training programs which actually train you to hit some certain sectors. So one of those of people that really want to move into an accounting or to an office environment, there's programs there to help them. There's an environment new one around supply chain management. As we all know, the importance of supply chain, tremendous opportunities in the future of Lethbridge around supply chain. And then the brand new one, which is really exciting, is new digital technology skills. We all know all future jobs are going to have a digital component to them. So this program gives people specific skills around digital training and marketing to go ahead and get those jobs of the future.
The center has assisted over 35,000 Albertans in finding work over the past 30 years. For Bridge City News, I'm Micah Quinn.
Elected officials and some officers of the Lethbridge Police Service took part in the polar plunge for the Special Olympics. After 2 years of the plunge being held virtually, organizers say they were happy to have a smaller group come out, bear the cold, and take a dip for a good cause. Constable Braylon Higgins says they've received a number of donations so far.
Team was just over $2,000. I think we're still a few donations trickling in, so we're just about $2,200 for our team thus far. And the province has a goal of 100,000, and I think we're over 60,000 at the moment. So that's not including any of the cash donations that'll be yet coming in, but that's all the online donations. We're slowly getting there. So this will go till middle of March. So hopefully we can meet our goal.
The Alberta Law Enforcement Torch Run hopes to raise $150,000 this year. Many of us dream of living on an island, but some students at Lethbridge College will have the opportunity to work on a virtual one. It's called the Aftermath Islands Metaverse. The college has partnered up with Liquid Avatar Technologies to give students 9,000 plots of land, learning in a virtual setting alongside their in-person classes. Sherry Bauer, the chair of the college's Spatial Design Technologies, says this will be a vital step for students going forward.
Building out an island in the metaverse and leading in that way when we are watching the direction of where the metaverse is going to go with great excitement will be invaluable for them, not only in terms of the creativity, the building of those worlds, the possibility of in the future, very short future, meeting inside of that space and being able to lead. So these students are going to get some experience in entrepreneurship and leading in this space.
Aftermath Islands Metaverse represents theme-based islands, communities, and estates where players can experience adventures and opportunities. Well, the group that represents Alberta's 69 counties and municipal districts will vote on a motion to keep the RCMP as their police force. The Rural Municipalities of Alberta motion calls for asking Premier Jason Kenney's government not to create an Alberta Provincial Police Service. Delegates are to vote on the question at the association's convention in Edmonton later this month. Coming up, the last 2 years for Albertans have been full of hot topics, political maneuvering, and planning. Many think this is building to the 2023 provincial election. One main hot topic has been that of an Alberta police force, which you just heard about. Coming up after the break, we hear how we may be focusing on the wrong things when it comes to this provincial law enforcement. Stay with us. Welcome back. We've been hearing about the provincial government proposing the idea of a provincial police force and doing away with the RCMP. What we've mostly been hearing are the negatives associated with this, like cost to Albertans. However, my next guest sheds some light on why a provincial police force could actually be a good idea. Here's my interview with Drew Barnes, the independent MLA of Cypress Medicine Hat. We've heard that this is a very expensive option, but can you maybe tell us why the provincial police force might be a good idea for the people of Alberta?
Well, great. Thank you for that. Well, first of all, more control over our policing. Too often, rural crime is reaching extremes in Alberta. Albertans aren't feeling safe. Albertans aren't being protected. First of all, this would allow Albertans to have more control over the quality of their policing and directing it. Secondly, it comes down to a large part of the leverage in the situation we're in with our Canadian partners. Not only do we send upwards of $25 billion a year to Ottawa, the relationship has been defined to me as even abusive at times. We can't get pipelines. We can't get free trade with our Canadian partner. And that brings back the quality of life and the income for Alberta families and Alberta communities. So there's some of us that believe that, yes, we want to be a strong part of Canada, but we need equity and fairness. So things like our own police force, like Ontario and Quebec both already have, would not only give us the opportunity for more say and control over our policing, but it would help Ottawa understand that Albertans want to have more control over their situation, and we want a fair deal. We want resource movement, and that would be a good first step.
Mm-hmm. So considering that idea of a provincial police force, you obviously see value there where others say it's just too expensive?
Well, I think part of the problem there is Premier Kenney, my goodness, in his third year, he has lost so much trust with Albertans and Alberta municipalities. He hasn't clearly conveyed to our municipalities how it would work and how the cost would be. As an example, I understand that right now the federal government supports Alberta to the tune of about $350 million a year for policing. But again, in some municipalities, were understaffed. And secondly, the cost of policing has just been increased substantially. I mean, God bless the individual work that individual RCMP officers do, but I understand they just all got a $20,000 retroactive raise, which of course, eventually the taxpayer will have to pay that. So with the other financial situations that Ottawa's boxed themselves into, it's only going to get less and less likely that they'll continue to support policing, through Alberta. So let's put Alberta families first in mind. Let's make our communities safer. Secondly, let's have more say over our police force and where we need them. And thirdly, let's show the rest of Canada that it's time that Alberta be treated with equality and fairness, that we get resource movement, and doing things like the police force are a step towards showing that we can be more autonomous.
Mm-hmm. So do you think that maybe the provincial government just has not done a good idea of educating these individual municipalities on the benefits of what a provincial police force might look like? I believe there's something like 80 some odd municipalities across Alberta that are banding together to present to the provincial government their reasons for why this is not a good idea. Do you think that they just haven't been sort of informed, or do you think that they're going into this well informed and they just still are, standing firm and saying no?
Yeah, well, I also think it's partly municipalities have had a lot of pressure on them right now, our elected representatives. For many people in Alberta. This has been a tough 2 or 3 years, even longer with the, with the change in oil pricing 5 or 6 years ago. And municipalities are hearing from their constituents that they can't raise taxes anymore. So good, caring councillors and mayors and reeves are concerned about having to pass more costs back to their ratepayers. So I think that's where it starts. But then the secondary problem is sometimes I'm hearing about how, because of staffing issues, that the RCMP can't be in enough places throughout rural Alberta, especially. So we need to have these services. So I guess that, to me, that's where it starts. We need a provincial government that shows Alberta municipalities that when it comes to issues like safety, we'll be there for them.
After the break, we speak with a member of Parliament about Trudeau's Emergency Act and the Conservative leadership issues. Keep it right here. Welcome back. These are unusual times we're living in. COVID mandates are lifted in certain places, but not in others. It's been 2 weeks since the police violence brought an end to the Ottawa Freedom Rally. The Conservative Party of Canada needs to elect a new leader, and Russia stays the course to keep NATO forces away from its border, and so continues the conflict in Ukraine. Joining us to discuss this from Ottawa is Lethbridge MP Rachel Thomas. What about the fallout from the Emergencies Act imposed by the Trudeau government? Many Canadians and indeed many other nations saw this as a significant government overreach. Should there be some kind of a better explanation from the government or some kind of consequence for taking freedoms away from Canadians, not to mention freezing bank accounts in some cases?
Again, a really great question. And certainly, I think you're asking a number of the questions that Canadians are also asking. So when it comes to the Emergencies Act, really what we have to wonder is, was the threshold met in terms of whether or not it was reasonable or right for the Prime Minister to enact the Emergencies Act? Ultimately, the threshold is that the Prime Minister should have no other tool at his disposal or current law at his reach that would help deal with, the crisis at hand. Well, in this case, the Emergencies Act was invoked after we saw the border crossing in Windsor cleared, after we saw the border crossing in Manitoba cleared, after we saw the border crossing at Coutts in Alberta cleared, after we saw the border crossing in Surrey cleared. So all 4 of these borders were able to be cleared out, and the protests were resolved peacefully without the invocation of the Emergencies Act. So for the Prime Minister then to claim that he needed the Emergencies Act in order to bring, order back to Ottawa is just absolute ludicrous. It is incredibly disingenuous, in my opinion, because ultimately, at the end of the day, we see that the tools that the Prime Minister needed or that the police needed in order to act, they already existed. The Emergencies Act was simply an overreach of power. It was a flex that the Prime Minister got to engage in order to try to salvage his own image. It was wrong. It was very, very wrong, I believe. Further to that, what we saw is on Monday, the Emergencies Act was passed in the House of Commons because the Liberals and the NDP teamed up on that. But then by Wednesday, the Prime Minister was making an announcement that he was actually going to be revoking the Emergencies Act. It was no longer in effect. What changed from Monday to Wednesday? Well, I can tell you this. Nothing in the downtown core of Ottawa changed within that 48-hour period of time. The only thing that changed was public opinion. And so I applaud Canadians for standing up and for speaking out, for making their voices heard, because ultimately, I do believe that they applied enough pressure that the Prime Minister saw he was going to be made a fool of if he continued down that road. Again, I would draw people's attention to the fact that nothing changed in those 48 hours, which again should tell us that Emergencies Act really wasn't needed. The only emergency there was one that Trudeau created for himself. He needed to save his image.
Wow, unprecedented times, absolutely. These are. Rachel, let's switch gears once again. Your own party is going through some transition currently. Any thoughts on the CPC leadership race? Some see it as boiling down to a race between true blue conservatives like Pierre Poilievre and red Tories like maybe perhaps Jean Charest or Peter MacKay. What's happening there?
Sure. I guess I would maybe lead out by saying this, and that is my opinion on the matter is this. I think for a long time we've talked about, the reform conservative, the social conservative, the red Tory, the blue Tory, etc. We have these terms that we like to use to describe variations within conservatism. My hope is that in this race we actually abandon that practice. A conservative is a conservative is a conservative. And one of the things that we pride ourselves in as conservatives is the ability to span the right side of the political spectrum and hold, a variety of viewpoints within that framework. So really, I'm looking for those who are, leadership hopefuls to be able to clearly define the essential principles of conservatism versus the peripherals. And they're going to have to really do some soul searching and I think through what those critical items are in terms of our principles as a party. And then they're going to need a plan that they put in place in terms of how to adhere to those principles.
We'll be right back with more after this. Welcome back. Lethbridge's Chinook Regional Hospital will be the home of some new intensive care beds. Alberta's health minister says the government will be spending $300 million over the next 3 years to add more ICU beds in hospitals. Jason Copping says $100 million of that will be spent this year to create 50 permanent ICU beds across the province. Copping says the COVID-19 crisis, which overwhelmed existing intensive care units, highlighted the need to add more beds quickly.
Lethbridge will be the focus for any new ICU beds here in the South Zone. Overall, our goal is to ensure maximum flexibility so the system can surge when and where it is needed. And resources can be redeployed to support other parts of the health system when ICU is not facing pressures. We expect these new beds to come online soon in the coming months.
Earlier this week, Premier Kenney announced a minor cabinet shuffle. Tyler Shandro is now the new Justice Minister and Solicitor General, and Casey Madu, who used to have that portfolio, will become the new Labor and Immigration Minister. Madu, who was our province's Justice Minister, had been suspended from the cabinet position following an investigation into a phone call he made to the Edmonton Police Chief 11 months ago regarding a distracted driving ticket. This week should have been the first time University of Lethbridge students were able to come back to in-person learning. Instead, the university's Faculty Association has completed its third week of a strike. Both the Board of Governors and the faculty are at a stalemate with their bargaining, and students just received notice that when the strike does end, the rest of the semester will be online. As a result, student solidarity appears to be rising. Many arrived at campus throughout the week to express their frustration and conduct a sit-in outside the president and vice president's offices.
We think that if they actually cared about us as students and the professors and actually were bargaining in good faith, they would have been at the table already. They would have resolved all this. Like in every other institution that has gone through this exact situation, they have already resolved all of their issues, and they have done it much more amicably than what is happening at this university. Like, it seems that they are using a scorched earth approach. They're trying to make an example out of us, and I think they really chose the wrong institution to be doing that.
We are the biggest stakeholders on this campus, and people need to start acting like we are. We pay their wages. We pay for them to work. We don't pay to get stuck outside of a strike that they knew was going to happen. We have students here who they're worried about their summer. We have students worried about their housing. We just got a letter from housing right now from students who are just told that if they have to extend the semester, they're going to be charged more to live there, which is ridiculous. This isn't our fault.
As part of the sit-in, students are asking for refunds on tuition, a vote of no confidence on the heads of administration, and an end to faculty restructuring. Meanwhile, an unfair labor practice complaint was filed by the University of Lethbridge Faculty Association against the university's Board of Governors. The complaint, which was filed with the Alberta Labor Relations Board, alleges the Board of Governors has refused to bargain seriously throughout the current round of negotiations and now refuses to come to the table to negotiate at all. The faculty strike is now into its fourth week following 2 years of failed talks.
The University of Lethbridge Faculty Association has never refused an invitation to the table in 2 years. The same cannot be said of the Board of Governors side. And since the beginning of the lockout and the strike, the Board of Governors has received multiple unconditional invitations from Alpha to return to the bargaining table and negotiate. They have said explicitly 3 times, quoting themselves, that they don't believe that a meeting would be productive. And so they have in fact refused each of our invitations since the beginning of the strike. The faculty and the students at this university are tired of being treated by the Board of Governors completely without respect.
For their part, the University of Lethbridge says it's the Faculty Association that's refusing to meet at the negotiating table. They also say the university has ensured faculty members remain well compensated, and over the last decade, faculty have had pay increases of 34%. Coming up after the break, we have some exclusive information about the upcoming Conservative leadership race, and we hear from our legislative correspondent about possible election spending by the UCP. That plus more after the break.
So this was a fairly controversial announcement last fall that healthcare workers were going to need to get their COVID vaccine. It was sort of added to the list of shots they had to get along with some of the other inoculations that were already mandatory.
Welcome back. We do at times expect flip-flops and election season spending from our governments. This past week, the UCP discussed reversing its controversial decision to require AHS workers to have up-to-date COVID vaccines. There has been so much more going on in Alberta this week, and to break down some of the issues, our legislative reporter and correspondent for the National Post, Tyler Dawson, and I spoke about the mRNA flip-flop, pre-election spending, and a ban on some Russian products here in Alberta. Take a look. Jason Kenney has asked Alberta Health Services to explore ending the vaccine mandate for healthcare workers in the province. What can you tell us about this?
So this was a fairly controversial announcement last fall that healthcare workers were going to need to get their COVID vaccine. It was sort of added to the list of shots they had to get along with some of the other inoculations that were already mandatory. And it was quite controversial in some quarters and led in some locations to a number of people who would not have been able to actually go to work, which could have sort of impaired the function of some small town and rural facilities. So the deadline was originally like the end of November. They had to do this, and that was bumped back to December 13th, I think it was. And then it was almost kind of scrapped entirely already because the Omicron wave hit and sort of swamped hospitals and they needed all the staff they could get. The government sort of allowed testing to be done instead of having this vaccination requirement. So to some extent, the mandate sort of already has died a little bit, I think would be fair to say. But Kenney is asking AHS to sort of officially explore ways to repeal that. And the province might instead, should there be other waves or other concerns about transmission, they would maybe just test all workers and the government would pay for that. So there's some sort of options to be explored there. Not totally clear on a timeline or when that's going to happen or whatever, but that is sort of the, a bit of the backstory on the vaccination mandate.
Okay, thank you. Of course, major news this week, the invasion of Russia into Ukraine. As that continues, it seems that many are banning Russian products and services, including the Alberta Gaming and Liquor Commission. It looks like they've banned new stock of Russian liquor.
Right. So this has actually kind of happened all over the country. There have been Manitoba, Newfoundland and Labrador, and Ontario, I believe, have all sort of pulled Russian products from their shelves. And the AGLC, which regulates gaming, liquor, and cannabis, in Alberta, is sort of doing the same, banning sort of the restocking of these products, I believe. And there's actually not very many of them, judging from other jurisdictions. You know, you had, I think, maybe Russian Prince vodka was the big one, and then a couple other provinces had they had a beer or two from Russia. So, you know, very much a symbolic move, I think is fair to say. But it is part of this much larger sort of movement of boycotts and sanctions and things like that are being done, you know, sort of at the personal level in decision making by regular Canadians, and also at the government level, the federal government level in particular, which has really leveled a lot of sanctions against Russian individuals and banned flights in Canadian airspace and things like that.
Yeah, and of course, likewise, AIMCO, Alberta's pension management firm, right? So they'll divest from Russia-related investments?
Yeah, and they've got about $158 million worth of sort of direct and indirect exposures is sort of the term that's used to Russian investments, which again is like, it's very, very little money. I mean, it sounds like a lot of money, but it's only about 0.1%, I think, of AIMCO's overall investments. But yeah, they're going to be looking at that. So it's a similar sort of thing, you know, arguably symbolic, but certainly part of this much larger trend that we're seeing right now.
Mm-hmm. Now, Tyler, there have been piles of funding announcements around the province. Perhaps would this be leading up to Kenny's leadership review next month? Do you think this could be laying the groundwork for that, or for next year's election, for that matter?
Yeah, that's the thing. I mean, there's so much political stuff going on at the moment that it's very hard to sort of separate these funding announcements from the sort of political machinations that are ongoing. We are about a year from an election. In theory, I mean, Jason Kenney could call an election tomorrow if he so desired. I have no indication that's happening, but you know, our scheduled election is for next year. And there is the leadership review coming up in early April. So there is a little bit of a fire hose of spending happening right now, with a new hospital expansion in Red Deer, or renovation, I believe, a childcare center, the Red Deer Regional Airport getting some upgrades. And that's all just sort of around Red Deer, which is actually where the leadership vote is going to be held. And of course, this is also a symbol a little bit of a better than expected, better than forecast provincial budget. And now there's a little bit of money to play with. But I bring that up at this point just because, you know, over the next year, I think we are going to see a lot of that sort of funding. We are going to see the UCP spending to try and shore up its reputation, I guess, in some of these jurisdictions where perhaps they see a fight with the NDP.
After the break, a special interview with Lethbridge East MLA is on deck. Keep it right here.